look at the Word of God today. And we're going to look at John chapter 5. We're going to look at verse 1 through 24. John chapter 5, from verse 1 through 15. John chapter 5, from verse 1 through 15. From verse 1, sometime later, Jesus went up to Jerusalem for the feast of the Jews. Now there is in Jerusalem near the sheep-gated pool, which in Aramaic is called Bethesda, and which is surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. Here a great number of disabled people used to lie, the blind, the lame, and the paralyzed. One who was there had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in great condition for a long time, he asked him, "Do you want to get well?" "Sir," the invalid replied, "I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. While I'm trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me." Then Jesus said to him, "Get up, pick up your mat, and walk." At once the man was cured. He picked up his mat and walked. The day on which this took place was the Sabbath. And so the Jews said to the man who had been healed, "It is the Sabbath. The law forbids you to carry your mat." But he replied, "The man who made me well said to me, 'Pick up your mat and walk.'" So they asked him, "Who is this fellow who told you to pick it up and walk?" The man who was healed had no idea who it was, for Jesus had slipped away into the crowds that was there. Later Jesus found him at a temple and said to him, "See, you are well again. Stop sinning, or something worse may happen to you." The man went away and told the Jews that it was Jesus who made him well. Until verse 15, and the title of today's message is "Get Up, Pick Up Your Mat, and Walk." That's what Jesus told this invalid man in verse 8. Get up, pick up your mat, and walk. So in today's passage, what we see here are sick people by the pools of Bethesda. And it's a sort of a sad kind of scene. You basically have people gathered here. There's some pools, and there's some colonnades, some tents, and you have sick people gathered here at these pools. And a lot of them had been there for many, many years. Some of them even for their whole life. And among them was this person. He had been an invalid for 38 years. He had been an invalid for 38 years. And what they believed is that an angel of the Lord would stir the waters, and the waters had some special healing powers. And that's why they were here next to those pools. So, every time I read this scene in the Bible and I think about this scene, I kind of think about a little bit about the saddest scenes I see in my own city of San Francisco. Here today I'm in Seattle, of course, so I think it's in many big cities, so Seattle must have this as well also. But in San Francisco, there was a news article that came out recently, and someone had taken pictures next to the BART station. So BART is or sort of mass transit, where they have the subways going across the Bay Area. And so, to get to these trains, of course, you walk through these sort of long hallways at the subway station. And someone had sort of taken videos and pictures, walking down these long hallways to get to the subway. And that's the commute they have every day. They have to walk through these long corridors to get to the subway. They have to do this every day. And so they started taking pictures and videos of what it was like. And essentially what you see is a whole bunch of people lined up along both sides of the walls, sort of slumped over. We're talking about primarily homeless people who are there, and captured inside of the video and posted, on this news article, talking about this sad situation. You saw in the pictures, people shooting up, drugs, basically, inside of these subway scenes. So, um, this was the kind of scene that, was posted up in this news article, and they were just talking about, this is the state of San Francisco in the Bay Area, and, and I think it's a scene that you kind of see throughout the world as well, too. So, you think about that kind of scene, maybe you've seen it in the big city before, and you see that kind of scene and the people sort of slumped over like that, and you might think, I'm not that kind of person, I'm not doing that, I'm not a drug addict or anything like that. But, you begin to think a little bit about why they're there and, why they're in the situation that they're in, with slumped over and just, shooting up drugs throughout the day while people are going back and forth commuting, to get to work, to start the day. And, really you begin to think about it, and there's so much emptiness in the world. There's so much emptiness inside the soul. And so, for them, shooting up the drugs like that, it's this temporary enjoyment that they can have, this temporary bliss that can sort of come to them. And, we may not be exactly like those, drug addicts per se, but we know the feeling, because living in this world, we can sense that feeling. We can sense the lack of true meaning, purpose, and something deeper. And what we can feel is that, as we look at that scene and as we live inside of the world, we can see sickness. We can feel and understand sickness, inside of the world. That there's so much sickness inside of the world. I mean, here at the pools of Bethesda, what you're seeing are a whole bunch of sick people, all kinds of sick people. The blind, the lame, the mute. Right? This is what the Bible talks about. All kinds of different kinds of sick people. And so, there's something like that as well, too. There's sickness inside of the world, the blind, the lame, and the mute. I'm not talking about physically sick, but, the blind, being unable to truly see, being blinded by the world. Lame, trying to walk through life, but, my leg is, I'm lame, so my leg, when I walk through life, I'm lifeless. I'm trying to walk in life, but I'm lifeless. Or, someone like the mute, right? Someone unable to truly speak what is in their hearts. They want to speak, but they can't. And so, the words just sort of stay in their hearts, and it becomes frustrating. So, we may not be the blind, the lame, or the mute, or these kind of things, physically, but spiritually we begin to understand that, there exists something like this. There exists, sickness inside of the world. And so, still other people we can say are like this invalid. This invalid who had been an invalid for 38 years. He's a person who was unable to move on his own power, right? That's the kind of person he was. He was an invalid, right? And so, physically he couldn't move under his own power. That's what it means to be an invalid. And so, when we look at today's miracle, when we see a miracle like what we see today, we need to ask ourselves, as we see sickness, frankly, inside of the world, we need to ask ourselves, are we sick? Are we sick like we see in the world? Are we like this invalid? Because, the Bible is recorded history. Of course, this is recorded history, that events that really did happen. But the Bible is also living history as well also. The Bible is living history that relates to my life today. So as we look at the miracle today that we see, that Jesus performed here, it's a miracle for myself, and how it affects me. And I think that's the most, piercing part of the Bible, how closely it relates to my life. Now, how am I like this invalid? How am I unable to move on my own power? Am I trapped in the pools of Bethesda, trapped in, maybe just the comfort of just, being there and being trapped in sort of the meaningless boredom and maybe the addictions that this world provides. Because there are things like this in the world. I mean, there are things like that that sort of keep you stuck there in the world. It keeps you stuck. It keeps like the addictions of the world. I keep saying because it keeps you stuck in the world like that. One addiction. You know, you can see this when you go to Las Vegas. My parents, they're retired in Las Vegas, so sometimes we go there and we'll go to the buffets in the casino, and as we're passing by and going to the buffets in the casino, what you see is people sort of just taking the machines and they just, pulling it down. So they put a coin in, and then they pull it down. They put another coin in, and they pull it down. And they do this for like hours and hours and hours. They spend the whole day like that, putting the coin in, and then pulling it down. And, you walk past them and these blank expressions on their face. Sometimes I see these blank expressions, I think, on my kids, actually. I see them on my kids because, there's this big screen in front of them with the video game. And so they're playing the video game there, and there's this, blank, expression, on the screen, like that. I say my kids do it, but in actuality, so many of us are like this as well. So we do it with our own computer screens. You can see it as you're walking, down the street, and people are just, looking at their phones. It's very, there's this a lifeless way in which people walk, inside of this world, and it's really like that. The world, it's like this sort of comfort of being by the pools of Bethesda. And so I'm just kind of stuck there. I'm just kind of stuck next to the pools of Bethesda and the comfort it sort of provides. And so I'm just kind of stuck there like an invalid for even 38 years, like this. And so, that's what I want us to reflect on in today's message. If there's anything like that for me, is there anything that I'm like that I am like that I'm consumed in the world? I'm consumed in sort of the meaninglessness and the boredom and the addiction of the world that causes me to be trapped in that way. Now, if so, the story of the invalid man definitely relates to me. It definitely has an application to my life. And if it does, then the good news is that Jesus is coming to us today. Jesus is coming to us today just like he came to the invalid man. Let's take a look at this back in the main passage. In John chapter 5 and verse 6. In John chapter 5 and verse 6. This is Jesus coming to the invalid man. In verse 6, when Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in this condition for a long time, he asked him, "Do you want to get well?" Do you want to get well? Jesus is coming and asking us that today. Do you want to get well? Now that's the first step, right? Do we want to get well? Do you really, really want to get well? I'm so used to the comfort of my life. I'm so used to the pools of Bethesda. I'm so used to the boredom and meaninglessness that the world provides. And, it's just comfortable. It's just comfortable. I know it's meaningless and it's a little bit empty, but it's comfortable and I'm used to it. So, the question comes to us like that. Do you want to get well? Do you really want to get well? Because if I heal you, right? If I heal you, if Jesus comes, there's this implication behind the way that Jesus says this. Now, do you want to get well? Because if I heal you, then you will be expected to walk. You'll be expected to be active and contribute. So are you ready for that kind of change? Do you want to get well? Are you ready for that kind of change? Do we really want it? Now that's the important question that we have to ask ourselves. Do you want to get well? That's what Jesus is coming to us with, that kind of question. There's a book entitled Happiness is a Choice. This is the title of the book. Happiness is a Choice. And so it's a book written by a couple of psychiatrists. So in this book, the psychiatrists, they talk about their patients. And so, the patients come, they sit in their room on the couch or whatever, and they say, I can't. I can't do it. Whatever it is in their life that they're complaining about to the psychiatrist. I can't do it. And, the psychiatrist listening to them, of course, they've got so many patients that are like this. I can't do it. And, for them, as they write in this book and they talk about it, it's like, it's really just, it's just an excuse, right? It's just like a really lame excuse to say I can. And what they tell their patients to do is to say, stop saying the word can't, but use the word won't. And so this book pushes that. Stop saying the word can't, but use the word won't in its place. And, what they say is that, when they tell these people to do this, then they start to face reality a little bit about their situation. And instead of saying, I just can't get along with my wife, I just won't get along with my wife. I just can't stop drinking, and that changes to, I just won't stop drinking. I won't stop getting angry. I won't stop sinning. I won't forgive. And, when you change the can'ts into won't, then they stop avoiding the truth and they start facing reality. And it's the same when it comes to being healed with the Lord. We so often say it like that. We are stuck in whatever thing we're stuck in inside of the world, and we say, we can't. We can't get out of what I am doing. I'm pretty much stuck there. I can't get out of it. I'm in the world. I'm an invalid. What can I do? I can't get out of it. But, what I want us to realize, as the question is coming to us today, is the real problem is that we won't. We won't get out of it. We won't get out of it and go to Jesus. As that question comes to us, do you want to get well? We need determination. We need determination to really want to do it, to be God's people, and the determination to serve God. There's a verse, Philippians chapter 4, if you look here. Philippians chapter 4 in verse 13. It says, I can do all this through him who gives me strength. Now, Jesus is coming to us and asking us that kind of question. Do you want to be healed? I hope your answer is yes, because that's the first step. The first step is to want to be healed. So let's go back to the passage and look a little bit further, back to the main passage in John chapter 5, in verse 7. So this is what happens next. John chapter 5, in verse 7. Sir, the invalid replied, I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. When I'm trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me. So that's what he says, right? So Jesus asks, do you want to get well? But he says, I have no one to help me. I have no one to help me get into the pool when it's stirred. Because the local belief was like that. When the water was, there were the pools here, right? And then the waters would suddenly start to stir, and the local belief was that, the angel was coming to stir the water. And so the first person to run over to the pools and get into the pool would be healed, by the power of the angels, stirring the waters like that, right? And so, that's kind of what he's complaining about here. He's saying that, I've been an invalid for 38 years. I can't get into the pool. No one helps me get into the pool. I mean, he's an invalid, right? So you've got all these people rushing to get over the pool, and they may not be invalid. Maybe, if you're a lame person, at least you can kind of get over there. But if you're invalid, you can't. Or, if you're mute, then definitely you can just run over there, right, and be the first one to get healed. And so, that's what he's complaining about. He's saying, other people are not helping me. Other people are not helping me get into that pool first, so that when it's stirred, I need to get in there first, and I need to be healed by the angel and the pools of the water first. And so he's complaining about it. When he wants to go in, no one's helping him, and someone else gets in first, and that's what he's talking about here. So he's an invalid, blaming other people for getting in before him and no one helping him at all. Really, when it comes right down to it, it's so easy to blame other people for our problems. Now, other people are getting in before me. Other people aren't helping me out. And we so easily blame other people, and we don't take responsibility for our own problems. The Bible has many examples of this, actually. It's all throughout the Bible. People blaming other people. You look in Genesis, the serpent, tempts Eve, and Eve tells Adam to eat the fruit. And so when God comes later on and asks, what happened here? Adam said, the woman you gave me persuaded me to eat the fruit. And and then the woman says, the serpent persuaded me. And so they're blaming other people. At the cross there was Pilate, and he's like the Roman ruler sentencing Jesus to death. But he wants to, there's that scene where he's saying, I'm gonna wash my hands of this. He says, I'm being forced. Really, that's what he's trying to say when he says, I'm washing my hands of this. He's saying, I'm being forced. I'm being forced to crucify Jesus. And he's trying to wash his hands of it and be innocent. I'm being forced by, the Jewish leaders, and they're forcing me to do this. We blame others. We blame other people. We don't take personal responsibility. We say, I'd work harder, but no one appreciates my effort. I'd do better in my job, but, my boss just doesn't like me. I'd forgive that person. I'm like fighting with the person. I'd forgive that person, but, they just, won't change, so, I'm not going to forgive them. We say something like this. So many people make excuses. So few people actually take responsibility for their own actions. Romans chapter 14 and verse 12. Romans chapter 14 and verse 12, it says, so that each of us will give an account of ourselves to God. So each of us will give an account of ourselves to God. In the end, what's going to happen is that we are all going to face judgment. It's not about other people. At the end of our lives, and, we're appearing before God, it's not about other people and what other people are doing, but, we ourselves stand before God at that point. And that's why, we can't make excuses, but we have to take responsibility for our lives. And this is true no matter what circumstances we come from. My father, he always talks to me about this all the time. He always tells me stories of himself growing up, because he grew up sort of, really poor. He grew up in a poor family in Taiwan. They had 7 siblings. He had 7 siblings, and they lived in like a small, 1-bedroom apartment. So, they sort of stuffed in there, like that. And, his family was really poor. Barely had enough money to, even pay some of the school fees that he needed, let alone, it would get cold during the winters, and he didn't even have a jacket, to go to class with. And so, he was that poor that, his classmates, even felt sorry for him to be so poor. And so they, would gather, sort of the money together, and they bought a jacket for him, and they kind of put it on his doorway so he could use. And, this is the kind of situation he lived in growing up. But, he'll, of course, he's trying to encourage, me and my brother, of course, as the kids. But, he had to rise out of the poor conditions, work hard, make it into a good college, and, immigrate, here to the U.S. That's why I'm here today. That's why I'm able to live in the U.S. even today. I was born in the U.S. because, he immigrated here as a student, long ago. I met, my mom, his wife there, and that's his story, and that's why I'm here today. And really, what I want to say is that, that's the easiest thing to do, is to blame other people for our problems, blame other people for our circumstances and the situation in my life and the situation I'm in. I'm stuck here in the situation that I'm in, and because of that, I'm left to be an invalid. You know, heredity, environment, those type of things, how those factors play into my life, they influence us, but they don't determine us. We can rise above situations if we really want to, if we really try to. There are so many of the world's most successful people who had terrible, terrible pasts, but they were able to rise above it, and be successful people. And then on the other hand, there's people who are completely privileged. They were privileged with great wealth. Their family was well off. They lived in a great situation. Their parents or whatnot were took care of them and all that. But they wind up in bad places. Wind up really in this world, stuck in this world and struggling in this world also. And there's cases on all sides like this. So do we have something like this invalid man stuck there for 38 years blaming others? When I think there's a person written about like that in the Bible. It's not just a person written in the Bible 2,000 years ago, but it's me today. And that's why we have to look at this miracle that Jesus performed on this man. And how did Jesus perform this miracle? It's very interesting how it proceeded. If you look in verse 8. So if you look in verse 8 of John chapter 5, it says, "Then Jesus said to him, 'Get up, pick up your mat, and walk.'" So Jesus told him, "Get up, pick up your mat, and walk." So that's interesting, right? The man had to take action. He tells the man, you've got to take some sort of action. You've got to put some effort into it. And once he did, he was immediately healed. We can see that. Now, so in the Bible, there's something like this. Jesus frequently requires the people to take action. Right? He wants us to take action. He requires effort of the people who he heals. It's not always that happens, but oftentimes he asks of them something to take action like this. And what Jesus wants to see here, get up, pick up your mat, and walk, is a response of faith. I mean, to the invalid man, to the person who was stuck there for 38 years, Jesus is asking action of him. He's saying, get up, pick up your mat, and walk. Jesus is asking this man to attempt the one thing that he had not done in 38 years. For 38 years, he had just been stuck there. He hadn't attempted it even once because he knew he was just stuck there. And Jesus is asking him to attempt the one thing he hadn't done in 38 years. But when the man made the effort to do it, at once he was healed. We need to do that also. In faith, we need to put effort in faith. Jesus asks us that effort in faith. And there's a Christian musician. His name is Tony Melendez. And Tony Melendez, he had some issues because his mother had taken, this experimental sort of medication, thalidomide, while he was in the womb. And it was sort of a new drug at the time, to fix some things, but the doctors really didn't understand the side effects, of it at the time. And so tragically, many babies that were born if their mothers had taken this were born without limbs. They didn't have Tony Melendez didn't have any arms at all. Didn't have any arms. But I said he's a musician, right? So he didn't have any arms, but he was a musician. And so the musical instrument he plays is the guitar. So he doesn't have any arms, but he's playing the guitar. So the way he plays it is with his toes, actually. So, kind of think about this. He was born without any arms, but, the guitar is sort of in front of him. He's sitting back, and then he's got his toes, playing the guitar. And he plays amazingly well also. I mean, it's not just, any player. I mean, he plays professionally, like this. And can you Can you imagine that? Can you think about that kind of person doing that? And just think a little bit about the effort, it took him to do that. I mean, it's not like it just happened all at once. He had to train himself, to sit down, lay back with the guitar, at his feet, and he had to train to play the chords, with his feet, in that way. And if you can imagine the amount of a tremendous amount of frustration and determination and effort he had to put in to develop that kind of skill. So, when you really think about that, the effort, the action, if we really want to be made whole, we have to put an effort. We have to make an effort in faith. And the Lord asks us of that. In the Bible, it talks about it. He says, ask, seek, knock. In faith, he frequently asks us to take action. We need to take action. We need to make an effort in faith. And once this man, this invalid man, made an effort in faith, he was healed. Right? This is verse 9. John chapter 5 and verse 9. And once the man was cured, he picked up his mat and he walked. Now, how amazing is this miracle? He was an invalid man stuck in the pools of Bethesda for 38 years. It's that Jesus Christ came to this man, told him to pick up his mat and walk, and he was able to do exactly that. It was an amazing miracle. This is the miracle that Jesus Christ wants to do in our life. He continuously does in people's lives every day, that we were stuck in this world. We were living any which way which way in this world for 38 years. We were blaming other people for our problems, but Jesus Christ came into our lives, and through his sacrifice we were given the gift of salvation. We were trapped in the sins of the world, but with Jesus, we were able to pick up ourselves off the world, off the mats of this world, and walk with God. It's a miracle that happened 2,000 years ago. It is happening today to many people in our lives today that walk with Jesus. Because to walk with Jesus, to walk with Christ, is completely different than being stuck inside of this world. If you've accepted Jesus Christ into your life, then you know this well. How amazing is this great, great God of ours? How different is that life in God before that our life is now? For this invalid man, there's no comparison. There's no comparison of being like an invalid man stuck by the pools of Bethesda. He doesn't know it. He's comfortable there for 38 years, continuously thinking, this is comfortable, and I kind of just, well, maybe I'll just live here like this the rest of my life. But, those of us that walk know. I mean, if you walk, we all do, I think. If you walk and, there's an invalid man that's stuck there, it's a completely, completely different world of that man stuck there by the pools and people who walk, right? It's a completely different thing. And so, it's the same thing when it comes to Jesus Christ. The people who are stuck inside of the world, living any which way they are inside of the world, and the people living in Jesus Christ, it's a completely different world. And if you are a person that has accepted Jesus inside of your life, you know this. You know that living in the world for 38 years, being stuck inside of the world like that, is completely different than living the life in Jesus. And so, we know there's no comparison. You can't even compare the two, living in the world and living with Christ, and living like an invalid and walking. It's a completely different world. And really, living with Jesus Christ, because of that, it's something we should praise every day. We should praise every day to God in our lives for what he has done for us. But then, what happens is when you really think about it, we should praise every day. I mean, it's a completely different world here, but when you really think about it, what happens? What so often happens is that we easily forget, right? We so easily forget what God has done for us. There's something like that happens in today's passage. Now, today's passage, what we see from the rest of today's passage is basically from verse 10 until 15. There's this sort of like this back and forth. The Jewish leaders are opposed to this miracle on the grounds that, it's breaking the Sabbath. They wonder how he was able to walk, and then they said, this man told me to pick up my mat and walk. And so, the Jewish leaders are saying, you picking up your mat and walking, that's breaking the Sabbath. You can kind of see that. This is in verse 10. In verse 10, and so the Jews said to the man who had been healed, it is the Sabbath. The law forbids you to carry the mat. And so, they're saying he's basically breaking the Sabbath. It has nothing to do with the actual miracle itself. There's this great miracle of a 38-year-old man who had been invalid for 30 years and he's walking. But, they're not kind of paying attention to any of that. They're paying attention to him breaking the Sabbath, right? They're saying, you're breaking the Sabbath. And it wasn't even like, we're not talking about Genesis chapter 7 right here. Genesis chapter 1 when God says, rest on the seventh day. Right? We're not talking about like the Bible here. We're talking about rabbinical code. So it's not like there's something in the Bible where it says you can't pick up your mat and walk. It's not even in the Old Testament. It's not in like Numbers or Leviticus or anything like that. We're talking about rabbinical code. So we're talking about, rabbis who wanted to like classify and clarify what it means not to work on the Sabbath. And so they're saying it's rabbinical code that you cannot pick up your mat and walk on the Sabbath because that counts as work. So, it's really fascinating here what's going on. They're not seeing the miracle. They're not sort of recognizing this amazing miracle that's happening, but they're seeing something else completely. And they're sort of confusing the situation, saying, how could you do that? They're not looking at the miracle, but they're saying, how could you do that? How could you pick up your mat and walk? And they're kind of confusing it with this other situation. In faith, there's something like this, I think, as well, when you think about it. We get confused like this. Just like these Jewish leaders are confusing the situation, we get confused like this also. We get confused really about what the miracle of Jesus coming into my life really was. Most of these people in this scene are, sort of looking, as you can see later on, they're looking at this and they're seeing this outward miracle of this invalid man and getting up and walking. That's really amazing. That's really, I got to say, that's amazing in and of itself that, he can get up and walk like this after 38 years. But, that's not really the miracle here. That's not the miracle. What the miracle that Jesus is looking for us and what he really performed of this man and what he's asking of him is an act of faith. That's really what the miracle that he's looking for us in. God is looking at our hearts and he's looking at the faith inside of our hearts. And he's looking, at the core of our hearts. And that's what the miracle really is about. When he says to the man, get up, pick up your mat and walk. He's not looking, God's not looking. Jesus can do anything. He walked on water. He fed 5,000 people at once with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. He rose from the dead on the cross. He did a lot of things. So, having an invalid man just sort of get up and walk, this is pretty straightforward for the Lord. But that's not what he's looking at. When he's telling this man, get up, pick up your mat and walk, he's looking for an act of faith. For this man who couldn't have done it for his entire life, he's asking him to do that. He's looking for an act of faith. And that's how God views us. That's what God really, really wants from us. He wants our hearts. He wants to see faith in our hearts. There's something like this where, I got to say, as parents, we get confused. I've got 3 kids. Parents, we kind of get confused sometimes as kids get older. I've got one 13-year-old. He's going to high school next year, and I think this really happens when you get older and older into high school and college. You know, parents, they put a lot of pressure. Put a lot of pressure on their kids. You got to do something great inside of those. Well, maybe you've felt this kind of pressure from your kids. You got to do something great. You got to do something with your life. You got to go out there, get a job, make money, get your degree or whatever. And because of this pressure, this constant pressure that parents put on their children, sometimes it strains relationships. Sometimes it strains relationships, between the child and, and the parents. And, when parents do this, I think what we forget sometimes is, we forget, that moment, when our kids are born, the simplicity, really, the simplicity of when our children are born. That, when our children are first born and we have them and they're kids like that, we're not, we're looking at them, and yes, we want them to do great things, but, there's something more than that we even really want from them. We want to love our child, and we want them to love, we want the child to love us back. And there's, a simplicity behind that, and we kind of forget that as our relationship sometimes gets strained inside of the world because of that we forget about that. That as parents, when our children are first born, we just kind of look at their hearts first and want a relationship with them. Now God, that's how God is with us. God's love is unchanging. It's not like God's love changes in that way. Unlike us, who sort of maybe put a little bit too much pressure on our children like that, and strains relationships. But God's heart is the same from the beginning until the end. When God created us, He wanted that relationship of love with us, and that relationship of love was there at the core. Now, if you look in Genesis chapter 1, in verse 27, this is how God created us. In Genesis chapter 1, in verse 27. God created man in His own image. In the image of God He created them. Male and female He created them. So, really what the miracle of faith is going back to the beginnings like this. The miracle of faith is opening up our hearts to restore that created image. That original relationship of love that we should have with God, it's restoring that original beautiful image that God gave us. Inside of the world, the image gets, corrupted, and a lot of things, really dirty up the image, but, restoring. Having faith is really restoring that beautiful created image that God created us with. I've traveled around the world, and I gotta say, one of the most beautiful places I've been to, if you haven't seen it, you should go, is the Great Wall. The Great Wall. It's one of the top places I've seen in the world. There's a handful of places. Yosemite. I've been to Interlaken Lake in the Alps, in the Swiss Alps, and that's beautiful as well also. But the Great Wall, I like the Great Wall because the Great Wall is like the ultimate creation of mankind, right? They say, it's the man-made, structure that you can see from space. That's kind of what they say about it. It's like this amazing, amazing feat of man was the building of the Great Wall. It's not like they had modern technology like we had now. I mean, they built the Great Wall way back when. So, if you go to the Great Wall, you can see, just really how great it is. And what's beautiful about it as well, too, is that, the Great Wall is set against some of the most beautiful nature in China. You gotta take a bus. You gotta take a bus about an hour away from Beijing to get to the Great Wall. I mean, there's parts of the Great Wall that are near the city, but the most beautiful parts and the one that most of the tourists go to, you gotta take a bus for about an hour or a couple hours to sort of get to the Great Wall. And what you see really is, it's really magnificent because you've got basically the ultimate creation of man, set on the background of this stunning, beautiful nature of God. And when you see something like that, and you have something like that, you think about how great God's image is that God gave to man, this amazing, amazing potential. Against the backdrop of the amazing creation of God, the beautiful nature, you've got this amazing, amazing great wall, which was the greatest creation that mankind created. You can see mankind's potential in that. If you look, continue on from Genesis chapter 1 and verse 31. In verse 31, God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, and the sixth day. So that same day, God created man in his own image. On that same day, God said it was very good. It was very good. That's how we were meant to be. Just like how God created this beautiful, beautiful world. If you think and you look at this world, you go to places like whatever, the Great Wall or Yosemite, or this great world, this amazing world that God created, all that God had created, and he said it was very good. That's how we were meant to be as well also. On the sixth day, he created man, and he said it was very good. That's how we were meant to be. We were meant to be very good. It's that just as God created this beautiful world, he wanted each and every single person to be very good as well also. We have this amazing, amazing potential inside of us. We have this amazing potential for greatness inside of us. We're not people meant to just, live our life wallowing in, sinfulness, wallowing in this world, like this invalid man who is sort of stuck in this world for 38 years, unable to move. No, we weren't meant to be people like this. God meant in his creation, we were meant to bring, it was meant to bring out this amazing, amazing thing inside of us. And so, that's why Jesus is asking of this man here today to change your perspective. He says, get up, pick up your mat, and walk. He wants us to change our perspective, change our hearts. He wants most of all for us to have faith, to believe in the Creator who created us so beautifully, and he wants us to build something great with our lives. God's miracle is not necessarily something we're going to see so amazingly outwardly, so immediately like that. But, the core of it, really the core of it, we get confused. Sometimes just like these Pharisees, these Jewish leaders are sort of confusing this man and what the miracle was, that it was breaking some rabbinical code of the Sabbath. We get confused sometimes in faith, but, the core of faith is taking the first step. It's taking the first step of having a relationship with God, and knowing that God will work through that. And I want to end today's sermon with a story told by a longtime pastor. His name is Wade Hughes. He's a Wade Hughes Sr. That's the name of this longtime pastor. He tells this story that I like a lot. This is how the story goes. There was a weak and sickly man, and this man's condition grew worse and worse, and he couldn't afford a doctor. So, this sickly man lived in the deep, deep backwoods of an old log cabin. And outside of his log cabin, just a little bit outside of his cabin, was this huge boulder just outside his cabin, this huge boulder. And so, one night, this sickly man, had a dream. And God told him in that dream, I want you to go outside and I want you to push that massive rock, that massive boulder. I want you to push that in front of your home all day long, day after day, until I tell you to stop. Right? So God told him that. He told him that in a dream. I want you to go out and I want you to push that boulder until I tell you to stop. So that man, receiving that inspirational dream, the sickly man, being told to go push that rock, he got up early in the morning, and with great excitement on that first day, he went up and he pushed that rock for as long as he could. He pushed with all his strength. He tried to push that rock, and he pushed as long as he could, and after he rested a little bit, and then he went and pushed it a little bit more, and he pushed it more. And that vision, that vision, that dream, that night vision he had was so real to him that it inspired this man to wake up every single day and just keep pushing at that rock. And that's what he did. He kept pushing and pushing at that rock. And each day he pushed a little bit harder and a little bit harder and a little bit longer. Every single time he would rest and he would push a little bit longer. Day after day after day, he would push that rock. And so days rolled by and weeks rolled by, and those weeks turned into months. And every day he would faithfully pray to push against, faithfully pray to push against that rock. So, after 8 months, so we're not talking about 8 months later, after receiving that dream from God, of pushing that rock, the man got tired. He got tired of pushing the rock so much. And in that tiredness of pushing that rock, he started to doubt, that dream of pushing the rock. And so, he measured, so he measured the distance from his porch to that rock, right? And after pushing the rock, he would measure to see how much he had moved that rock. So he kind of knew, from the distance of the front of his house to the rock, how much distance it was. So he would measure it and he would see how much it moved. So after some more months of pushing and pushing and pushing and measuring and pushing and measuring that, he realized that he had not moved that rock even a fraction of an inch. Not even a little bit. He had not even moved that rock even a little bit at all. Not even a fraction of an inch or anything at all. In fact, that rock was in the same exact place of which it had started, probably. Most likely, after all that time, since the first time he got that dream, that rock was in the same exact place that he had started with. And so this man was so disappointed because he saw all the work he had accomplished in pushing that rock was nothing. And he was tired, and it seemed like the dream seemed dashed upon that rock. And so he sat in front of his house and he cried because he had invested so much time for nothing. And so as he was crying there in front of his house, Jesus came in a vision and sat next to that man as he was sitting by his porch, and he said, "Son, why are you so sad?" And the man replied, "Lord, you know how sick and weak I am, and you gave me that vision and you built up false hope inside of me. I have pushed that rock with all my might every single day for days and weeks and months, but that old rock is just sitting there in the same exact place of where I started." And so, Jesus told him, I never told you to move the rock. I just told you to push against the rock. And so, Jesus told that man, "Go step in front of a mirror and look at yourself." And so, that man, went in front of the mirror, and he was shocked. He was amazed. How could he have missed it? That sick, weak man, looked in front of the mirror, and suddenly he was like a strong and muscular, man. And it dawned on him that he had been feeling better for months. And, it was really because of all that pushing, not the moving of the rock, but all the pushing of the rock. He realized he got healthy even because of that. And that man realized that the plan of God was not to change the position of the rock, but was to change him. God's plan was not for the rock. God's plan was for him. We too, I hope we can truly reflect on this today, understand that really today. Now, understand the plan of God inside of our life. Now, listen and follow God, because his plan, the potential, the true potential that God has for us, he wants us to do great things. And it's not nearly important, the rock in your life, to be moved, but it's important to push against the rock. God also wants that true image to come out of us. Whether we are doing this or that inside of the world, he wishes for true faith to be revealed. So reflecting on today's miracle, I hope we won't just be people who are stuck inside of this world, stuck like the invalid man for 38 years, stuck and sick in that way, but let's be a great testimony showing the true image of God. Follow the command of Jesus to pick up the mat and walk. And we can do this when we begin a relationship newly with God. We can do this when we follow the path that God has laid out for us. I pray that we can be the ones that can live for the glory of God in this way. Let's pray. Father God, we thank you, Lord. We thank you for guiding us to this place to worship you, to give service to you, Lord. For, Lord, we are weak and we are sick in this world, Lord. The world that we live in is a sinful world, and we are sick in sin. We are the blind, we are the lame, we are the paralyzed, we are the mute, we are the invalid ones who have been stuck in our same position in the world for 38 years. And Lord, we are like that because we failed to take action. We failed, Lord. We even blame other people for the situation we are in. But Lord, you call us to take action at this place, to pick up our mats and walk, Lord. And we wish to see, Lord, that more than even just a miracle of picking up or of the walking part, Lord, it is the miracle of having faith, Lord. It is having faith and beginning a relationship with you. For Lord, we know that you created us in your beautiful image. We were created with an amazing potential. You said, as you created us, we were very good. And in each and every single one of us, Lord, as you created us, we know we were meant to be that way too, Lord, to be very good. Not to wallow in sin in this world, but to be very good. And so, Lord, we wish to live up to that potential, to have faith in you, to listen to you, Lord. For more than, Lord, the moving of the rock, it is the pushing of the rock. You seek from us our hearts to live for you, Lord. And in this way, you will build up greatness in us. We thank you, Lord, for all that you give us and all that you are, and be with us, guide us, be with this Seattle Gracia church, and guide this church to be a great church to live for your glory and your kingdom. And in Jesus Christ's name I prayed. Amen.